look, my name's Monte Cristo, man. I love some Dumas.
I just have to say, I love some Dumas is like one of the most all-time Monte Cristo of Monte Cristo lines.
Welcome back to Nerd Legion. We're taking another break from our 1980s fantasy marathon, let's call it. We'll be back to it next week, but we are going to be talking about Bong Joon Ho's Mickey 17, a recent release, which apparently not doing super well in terms of the box office right now. Looks like it's not going to make the $250 or $300 million it would need to break even, unfortunately. This is Bong Joon Ho, who is a Korean director, his first film since he won Best Picture for Parasite. Now, people may be surprised, first off, if you've only seen Parasite, because obviously that was a Korean language film, that he has done English, or he's doing an English language film, but he has also done English language films in the past, even though most of his films are in Korean. And also, if you don't know anything about Bong Joon Ho, you may be surprised to see him doing a weird science fiction movie. But if you know Bong Joon Ho, you would know that he really does a lot of weird science fiction movies, and that, if anything, it was more strange that Parasite was not a weird science fiction / horror movie.
Yeah, I mean, really, this is Bong Joon Ho returning to his Bong Joon Ho-iest of way of making films, right? I mean, if you watched his other stuff in the past, Snowpiercer, Host, stuff like that, Okja, like he does really like science fiction. There's definitely a style to his movies that is pretty consistent, we'll say, from movie to movie. I'm sure we're going to get into all the specifics of that, but on surface level for Mickey 17, I liked it. I thought it was a fun science fiction movie, fun in sort of like the depressing way that his movies are usually fun. But you know, it was I thought it was pretty solid science fiction, right? I didn't think it was like the best movie ever. And you know, if you've seen one Bong Joon Ho film, you've kind of seen them all in terms of tone, in terms of what they're saying, we'll say. Right, themes, yeah, exactly. But he does it well, right? He's a good filmmaker. He consistently makes good movies, even though they all are, you know, fairly similar in a lot of ways. And I thought this was just a good example of that. It's like if you like Tarantino, you know, you know what you're going into, you know, kind of what the vibe is gonna be, right? And so I think it's like this too, where it's if you like the vibe of his movies, which is an acquired taste, I would say, for most people, you'll like this. And so I thought it was pretty decent. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, look, I had a good time in the theater. I think that the more that I reflect on Mickey 17 after having watched it, the less I like it. But it does have a lot of Bong Joon Ho moments. So, you know, one thing that Bong Joon Ho is very good at, and he writes and directs many of his films, is that he comes up with really interesting concepts and then runs with them. This one is based off of a short story, or a novel called Mickey 7 by a man named...
about to say,
Edward Ashton. So this is actually based on some source material. But he tends to gravitate towards some, I think, really unique concepts. And you see that in films like Snowpiercer, where the entire thought behind the film is that humanity, all of the remainder of humanity, is on one train that's like speeding through eternal winter, which is just a cool concept. So he gets weird, and I appreciate about him is that he's not afraid to explore things. He's also technically very good as a director. His films look very good. They're very aesthetically appealing. I think he nails a lot of the individual moments. He has a certain knack for black comedy that is very funny. And you definitely see that within this film as well. He seems to get a lot out of the actors as well that he chooses to direct. So he does seem to draw really good performances out of people, and many great actors, both Korean and Western, want to work with him as a result of this. Now, we will get into like the flaws of this movie, but in general, like, I'd probably rate this like a 6.5 out of 10, 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it when I was in the theater. I think where it falls down is that it just doesn't, it changes its focus too much in terms of what it wants to do. And as you pointed out, it does kind of, it starts very not Bong Joon Ho, and then eventually just kind of backslides into, here it is again, us talking about societal conflict and class. And I feel like he really did that very well in Parasite, and I don't need that from his films anymore. And I think this film especially did not need that and was more interesting in the first half and what he was looking at in the first half. And then eventually it just kind of slides back into that and doesn't really explore it or have anything in my mind that's meaningful to say about that, and loses a lot of focus.
Yeah, I would have given it, like we were saying, I guess we're rating things at the beginning of the episode this time around, but I was going to say like 7 out of 10, so maybe a little bit, but I just saw it like hours ago. So it's very, very fresh in my mind right now. And I like the theater experience. And again, like visually, he always does a very good job of creating these very interesting shots and all that. And I do like it from the standpoint of being, consistently interesting science fiction conceptually, And again, even if he didn't come up with this one himself, too, it really is in his wheelhouse. You can see why he wanted to adapt this because, thematically it fits a lot of his things, too. But it does what decent science fiction does, right? Where it shines a lens on someone's opinion of society. I'm not going to say society at large. I'm going to say someone's opinion of society. And it uses interesting future tech pieces to kind of demonstrate that, right? It puts you in a very interesting world where you want to see the characters go through this journey, where you want to learn more about the world, but it's also saying, it's also giving the author's opinion about the way things are now too, which is just generally, I think, good science fiction. So, I think for me though, the greatest joy in this was just watching Robert Pattinson act.
Oh, yeah.
Like he is absolutely one of my favorite actors right now, and he has an incredible range, a lot of which you see in this movie as he plays multiple characters, which are essentially different versions of himself in a literal and figurative sense. But yeah, he's just great. I mean, he has really, really come a long way. And maybe he was just always that good, and some of the early things he was in was kind of holding him back. I would suspect that's more the case than anything. But man, like between like Batman and this, like he's great.
And The Lighthouse, by the way. I mean, The Lighthouse.
I still haven't seen that. I admit
he's amazing. It's probably his best performance. But yeah, I agree. He's great as Batman. He was really good. I'm excited for the next Batman movie. He takes Batman in a very different direction. Robert Pattinson is just excellent in Mickey 17. Yeah. The way that he is forced to act with himself, the way that he differentiates the different iterations of Mickey from the original Mickey to the cloned versions of Mickey that are messed up in various ways, the way he uses accents to differentiate the characters, the way the characters interact differently with the same people who know him, especially Nasha, is really interesting. The performance from him is incredible. And to your point about his history, I will make a comparison, DoA. So obviously Robert Pattinson started out as a teen heartthrob from Twilight and Harry Potter, right? He wasn't given a lot to do in these roles, and so we're not going to debate his performance in that, but he has obviously come a long way. And I can't help think, DoA, about another historical teen heartthrob named Leonardo DiCaprio, who also
you were going to mention him,
was in a movie where he had to act with himself called The Man in the Iron Mask. And my name's Monte Cristo, man. I love some Dumas. So I was excited about this movie. Sure. And this movie could have been really good. I'll get the year that it came out in.
I just have to say, I love some Dumas is like one of the most all-time Monte Cristo of Monte Cristo lines, right?
So let me tell you about this film. This film came out in 1998. So this was like post-Titanic, peak of Leonardo DiCaprio teen heartthrob mania. Now, listen to this supporting cast. As the Three Musketeers and D'Artagnan, Jeremy Irons, John Malkovich, Gerard Depardieu, and
not bad,
Gabriel Byrne.
Yep.
And this movie is terrible. And the reason why this movie is terrible is it is completely ruined by Leonardo DiCaprio's atrocious acting, because he is bad as the King of France. And the plot of The Man in the Iron Mask is that the King of France has a twin that he has imprisoned and put an iron mask on in order to consolidate power and not have a threat to the throne from an identical twin. So, needless to say, later he is sprung from jail and freed, and Leonardo DiCaprio is then in scenes acting with himself, which are some of the absolute worst acting scenes I have ever seen in any movie ever.
It's so funny because I saw that movie only one time, and it was on the only thing that was worse than that movie was the high school date I was on when I went to it. That was one of I will never forget that movie because that was one of my worst, like, I bombed so hard high school date movies, and yeah, so I remember it for that, but I don't remember the acting too much. I remember going there and being like, this movie isn't very good, but like this date is going much, much worse. And so that is how I will always remember that film. But, you know, I'm just going to blame Leonardo DiCaprio as well. It was his fault. He clearly just sucked all the romance out of the room. And that was why it didn't work out. So, you know, things turned out in the end, but not that day. Thanks, Leo. Jeez.
And this is not an exaggeration, guys. If you've seen this movie, you know. If you haven't seen this movie, it's actually worth watching because there are good scenes in it that don't include Leonardo DiCaprio, but it is an absolute masterclass in how to completely ruin a movie as an actor. And it, to DiCaprio's credit, I do think so. The weird thing about DiCaprio is I think he was actually very good as a child actor in films like What's Eating Gilbert Grape. And I think he later came into his own, probably starting around Catch Me If You Can, where I do think he's a good actor now. But the middle period of his career, when he was in his teens and 20s, was horrible. And now Robert Pattinson is obviously older, right? But this is a comparison to his career arc where I think he was in these movies where it was expected that he was this teen idol character or this teen heartthrob. And he has then worked with, in my opinion, some of the best living directors, people like Eggers and Bong Joon Ho, and delivered tremendous performances, and not only good performances, but very difficult performances. And this is a very difficult performance. And in my mind, this is the reason why you watch Mickey 17, is Robert Pattinson's performance. That is the best part of this movie.
It is by far, I think, the thing that should be the draw, right? Because it is the standout part of the movie. Yeah, that's why I want to talk about it. Hey, did you know that very soon Robert De Niro is going to act with himself in a movie called The Alto Knights, where he plays two Italian mobster brothers?
Of course he is.
Won't that be fun?
Of course. You know, we could just get Al Pacino back and just have him act with Al Pacino some more, which has, by the way, created some extremely iconic cinematic scenes. But why do that when we can just only pay Robert De Niro, I guess?
I just thought it was funny, or does he get double? I don't know. I just thought it was funny that you know, in the trailers before this movie, they showed that one, and I was like, wait a second, are they trying to say if you like Mickey 17 because Robert Pattinson acts with himself, maybe you'd like to see a gangster movie where Robert De Niro acts with himself? It's more people acting with themselves. It's more people named Robert acting with themselves. Like, what's not to love, right? So clever trailer placement there, AMC. You don't need Nicole Kidman to sell me on the movie theaters. Just get me more actors acting with themselves. That's magic. Actorbation,
as it were.
It's light. It's light, Monty. And light is the formation of all brightness, which lives in the dreams of cinema in our hearts. Dude, these commercials before movies, man, like going to, yeah, that's right. That's definitely something she said in that.
For those wondering who are listening, no, DoA didn't have a stroke. He's making fun of Nicole Kidman.
Well, like, everyone's seen that, right? Everyone's been to movies in the last, like, I don't know, 10 years.
I don't know if they show that in non-American theaters, but anyway.
Oh, okay. Well, lucky us then. Lucky us, because they show it no matter where you go. You see it.
That's true.
In every single theater. Yep. I feel like.
Yeah.
I see it in my dreams.
So anyway, this film is about the quick overview and the concept behind this, because we've referenced it, is that effectively it's a sci-fi near future story that takes place in the 2050s, and there is a colony ship that is going to a planet called Niflheim, which is named after one of the Viking underworlds for not very complicated reasons. It is a frozen hell, just like Niflheim. It's pretty on the nose. And it is, this expedition is being led by a failed politician played by Mark Ruffalo.
Who is also fun in this.
Yeah, he is
he's
fun.
Also
I mean,
fun.
so
Yeah.
I mean, Toni Collette's in this, and she's fun too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so his name is Kenneth Marshall, and he is a failed American politician who is now taking all his followers to space. Robert Pattinson is in trouble, financial trouble, to a loan shark who is threatening to chase him to the ends of the earth. So he says, screw it, I'm going to go on this colony ship, but he has no qualifications because he's an idiot and a loser. And so he signs up to be what is called an expendable. And an expendable is basically a person who will have their consciousness downloaded into a computer, and they have a 3D printer that prints new bodies for him. They inject his consciousness, and then they use him for ethically questionable scientific experiments / dangerous tasks to comedic effect. And then they get to this planet and they discover some aliens that are sentient. And then they have a conflict about, are they going to kill the aliens or are they going to try and coexist with them, and et cetera, until they have a happy ending.
Yes, but there's much suffering along the way, which is another hallmark of Bong Joon Ho movies. But basically, like, Mark Ruffalo's character is kind of like there's not a lot of subtlety in this movie, but it's basically the MAGA crowd. It was as if Trump took all the MAGA people into space. They wear a bunch of red. They wear a bunch of red trucker hats. Like, come on, like it's the religious aspect thrown on.
Yeah, exactly.
I
was going to say Mark Ruffalo's character is like half Trump, half like charismatic evangelical leader. He's kind of a mashup between those two things. But it is really on the nose with like the red baseball caps, and it's just like, come on, man. Can we have some level of subtlety or nuance or original thinking here? That to me is one of the more disappointing parts of this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, man, if we aren't inundated with all this stuff, everything happening politically in the U.S., if we aren't like I said, inundated with that 24/7 whenever you open up your phone or any website, do we really need to like inject more of that into film? Like, again, you could have said the same thing without having it be so on the nose. You know, it's
also a timing issue, though. I mean, this film was supposed to release years ago. That's the thing about this movie too, was that it was originally supposed to release, I believe, in 2023, and then it got pushed back. So it feels very odd. Like, I think it could have been more timely previously, but as a result of the delays that were allegedly due to the SAG-AFTRA strike, they couldn't release the film. So it like kind of got pushed back in 2024, and then it got pushed back to 2025. And so I've been hearing about this movie forever, and it only just came out. And I think that both part of the timeliness of it has been lost as a result of that. Also, what's really weird, is it was supposed to release before the attempted Trump assassination in Pennsylvania, and they have a scene that is remarkably like the attempted Trump assassination in Pennsylvania, but that was filmed way before that assassination occurred. So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Where Mickey 18, because they're all numbered. Mickey 18 decides to.
Spoiler alert, by the way.
You're watching this.
If you're watching this,
Mickey 18 decides to assassinate Mark Ruffalo's character, Kenneth Marshall, and grazes him with a bullet from the crowd. And it is like, it's kind of shocking that was something that really happened, but you would think that they would have filmed that afterwards, or that potentially even though they would have delayed the movie because of that scene, but they actually delayed the movie before the assassination occurred. Because I looked that up, I thought to myself, did they actually delay this because this scene is in the movie? And the answer was no.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, knowing that, because I wonder if making it all very, very MAGA-esque, if it was kind of like an imagining of, well, what if all of those people just went to space?
Of course.
Left Earth, you know? So I wonder if that was supposed to be kind of the humor of it too, is like, what if all these people just like, you know, left or whatever?
Right.
But yeah, but seeing it now, it's kind of like, it does feel, it has that effect of feeling like too much, you know, where it's like, all right, we get it, you know, haha, right? I'm tired of this stuff. I just don't want to think about any of it anymore.
It does.
You know?
It just feels too on the nose and like not
Yeah.
subtle enough. It kind of hits you over the head with it, which is not very pleasant. I forgot to mention in terms of the summary that the core conflict is actually Mickey 17 doesn't die, and so they reprint him. So there's two Mickeys, 17 and 18, and Mickey 18 gets messed up in his printing process because one of the plugs falls out of his head, so he turns into kind of a sociopath, which is funny. And so you have a very kind of different iteration of Mickey and Mickey 18. Who's much more bold, much more aggressive, much more willing to fight for what he believes in. Calls the other Mickey a pussy, basically, which is funny.
Yeah, it is interesting because you don't know that it's an extra one being printed at the beginning of the movie when this happens, because we kind of see a bit of it and then we go back and see kind of a how did we get here, which is kind of the first third or so of the movie. And so it does, yeah, like you're saying, it does result in two very different Mickeys, which again, this is all just a vehicle for, people talk about movies being like vehicles for actors. This movie is very much a Robert Pattinson vehicle, going back to that, because it just gives him a great opportunity to just be two very different characters, right? In a really fun way. But like two different characters that are also more the same character than other instances of actors acting with themselves, which I thought was funny because yeah, they are the same person, but one is just slightly different, but that creates big decision-making changes, right? So there is that. But should we talk about, the internet, Monty, loves to talk about tropes. So should we talk about Bong Joon Ho movie tropes?
Yep.
What's something, should we list what you can expect to see in every Bong Joon Ho film in some way or shape or form?
Sure. Class conflict is something that you get, a kind of a ham-fisted
you do one, then I'll do one.
Approach to class conflict, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another trope I will say is young people of some species being abused.
Yeah.
That's always one. Yeah.
I would say food horror is one, where people are eating weird stuff that is intended to disgust you and make you question what you eat.
Here's another one. Rich people that are just like ridiculously goofy evil, like caricaturesque caricatures of goofy rich people villains, which does tie in with the food horror a lot because that usually ends up being one of their quirks. But if you're a wealthy person in a Bong Joon Ho film, you generally are kind of like a comedic mustache twirling, villain.
I would say entrapment is one of his themes that he does. So whether it's people like stuck in the basement of the house in Parasite, or stuck on a spaceship or a train together, there's a sense of being imprisoned and claustrophobia.
Mm-hmm. And finally, there's more we could list, but the one that ends every movie is victory, but at what cost, right? The character or someone close to the character has to suffer horribly and usually die in the process of achieving victory. It's always a bit of a Pyrrhic victory in Bong Joon Ho films. Now, I think having listed all that, we should say that Parasite, his most successful film, had that stuff, but dealt with it with the most nuance. And that, I think, is why that movie became the most universally successful, because it had all that. But if you look at Parasite, the wealthy people in that movie weren't really villains. They were just kind of oblivious. They were living their rich person life, and they just didn't really take the time to even much think about, the poor and the plight of the, lower class and all that. And that came back to affect them very negatively, obviously, but they weren't actively hurting people, I would say.
It was also less, it didn't feel like caricatures as much.
Exactly.
Like there were definitely elements of that for sure, but I agree with you. And I think, it also was very focused on the class issue, which I think really helped Parasite because it wasn't a sci-fi film. It could 100% focus on the class issues, and therefore it was I think a more tight and meaningful and profound film as a result. Whereas what I'll get to in a minute is how scattered Mickey 17 is thematically and how it really hurts the movie in terms of its overall messaging and themes. But I think
in that one,
no, I just think Parasite's a very good movie. Like it is like the ultimate Bong Joon Ho movie.
Yeah, I think that one too. The people from the lower social economic class are kind of the villains. Well, they are the villains, right? They're the people trying to like kind of kick this rich family out and like be very underhanded and sneaky, and they're the ones who are murdering people, you know. So that's a little bit of difference, because it's usually a class warfare from the bottom up in his movies, you know, and this is that, but in a way that kind of makes them the villain a little bit. But the nuance comes in that, like, you know, everyone is just acting as a product of that society, right? You know, the people from the lower socioeconomic class feel that this is what they need to do to get ahead, and there's no other way, right? And it's not right what they're doing, but they feel like this is their only recourse, right? So it's all, like I said, I think Parasite is his best film, because it deals with all the things he likes to talk about with the most nuance. Now, going back to Mickey 17, he also really likes science fiction, right? Because the majority of his films are that. So he's very much back in, I think, his comfort zone with this, for better or for worse. Like I said, if you love his style of doing things, you're going to love this movie. But, you know, it does come along with I think, some issues too.
Yeah, and I think for me, I really enjoyed the first half of this movie because it was funny, but also because what it starts as thematically is an existential question about the nature of the individual, if Mickey is the same person, if it's ethical when he knows that he's going to be resurrected, if it's ethical to run human experimentation on him, if it's ethical to have him do things that might be necessary to save other people at the cost of his own life, right? What are the psychological ramifications of experiencing death multiple times, right? There's a lot of really interesting stuff that we could be asking here. But the problem is that while the first half of the movie is very much focused on that, the second half of the movie doesn't deal with that hardly at all. And I think that's the real problem. And it's the backslide that I spoke about earlier, which is Mickey 17 starts as a existentialist film, a potentially very interesting philosophical conundrum. But what happens by the end of this movie is that all of a sudden it's like, well, what about the class warfare? And what about environmentalism?
Right.
And what about religion? And it's like it loses so much focus to the degree that we should be really interested in Mickey's character and Mickey's experiences, and yet by the end nobody seems to care about Mickey's experiences, including Nasha, the woman he's in love with, who is trying to have a threesome with two Mickeys while being high on drugs, and then in the climax of the film, while they're all chained up, giving some speech, a political speech and an environmentalist speech, and it has nothing to do with Mickey. So you feel that her relationship with Mickey is really rather superficial and hollow, and that she's actually just a political zealot who he's just a boy toy to her, and she finds it interesting that he slightly changes every time he's resurrected, and like the more Mickey's the better, I guess. But you know, when the multiples show up, and that's considered the ultimate sin, well, we can't have two of the same person, right? Which is why the crisis occurs with Mickey 17 and Mickey 18. They don't ever philosophically examine what that means. Are they the same person? Are they different people? No, we just ignore that. And it becomes like an environmentalist movie where they're trying to stop the big bad dictator from killing the bugs. And I'm like,
it kind of becomes like a buddy cop comedy after that, where you've got the mean one and the nice one, and
it's weird, man.
Yeah, they talk about it a little bit, like they touch the surface of it, where it's like, well, now if one of them dies, then they're really permanently dead because the other one that lives has the different memories. You've kind of branched into two separate people at this point, but beyond that, they don't really talk. I was really thrown by Nasha's turn too, because she seemed like the one that like really cared about him. You know, like she put on the suit, the hazmat suit, and sat in there while he died, testing like the virus, you know, inoculations and stuff. And like, so they really put her up as being like incredibly sympathetic and really loving him for him and really wanting to be there for him. And then, yeah, suddenly she's just like getting high and just like more interested in him as sort of like a fetish object kind of almost than like a person. And so I was like, are we supposed to not like her now? Is this supposed to be like a lesson that like, you know, we shouldn't trust people? Like what's being said here, right? Because it's almost like she does like a heel turn. Like she's still with him in the end, but because of the stuff that happens, you're like, is it, you know, do we really like trust her anymore and all that? So yeah, I thought Nasha's character started out really great and then became like very disappointing by the end,
and one dimensional, and basically just a very
it was very weird,
a mouthpiece to ham-fistedly attack Mark Ruffalo's character and spout environmentalism slogans. Like, and I think that's like really disappointing. And it could have, that's what I'm talking about. It loses focus. Like, we could have had some really, I think, interesting themes if we had kept with the themes that the first half of the movie has. But because Bong Joon Ho has this compulsion to slam all this other stuff that he always puts in movies in there, we end up with a film that isn't really about the nature of, like, the interesting science fiction question in this film, and is about contemporary culture instead. And to me, that's just lame.
Well, I'm very curious now to go back and read Mickey 7, because I wonder if there is kind of a deviation from the source material to something that's much more the Bong Joon Ho way of making movies and the way of storytelling, you know? Because it does feel like that. It feels like we're on one path, and then just like Mickey 17, Mickey Barnes, it's reprinted and starts to skew off in a different direction, you know? And that's when it becomes the most generic. Now, because like then you've got like the alien and like the baby alien, and of course because it's Bong Joon Ho, like one of the kids has to die, right? And so one of the baby aliens dies, and the other one's tortured, and you're like, this is why does he love doing this? You know, this is just something that always happens. Like I said, like kids get tortured and die in Bong Joon Ho films pretty frequently, which is strange to say the least. But of course it happens to this, and it's like it's okay because it's an alien, I guess, and we're not supposed to feel it as much, but. You know, but then all that happens, so it becomes like a rescue the baby alien story in the end, kind of, which is like, okay, great, you know. But again, it's that change, right? It's that change from like the conversation about what is life, which is interesting and definitely a cool science fiction thing to look into that, like I said, buddy cop comedy, where it's like, oh, we're fighting each other, but now we're friends. It was almost kind of a little bit Marvel-esque in that, you know, where it's like, there's this fight happening, and you know neither of them is going to kill the other one, because you know we can't have that in the story. They have to have their funny thing, and there are funny moments in the movie, but yeah, that part of it, I kind of started to get bored towards the end of the movie. This movie is 2 hours and 17 minutes long, by the way. It is a long movie, and I don't think it needed to be. I think it could have been a little bit shorter, and I think a lot of the meandering is from that second act, you know.
Yeah. It definitely could have been tightened up in the second half. I do think there are many things that I enjoy about Mickey 17 that are more subtle. So, for example, I really like a lot of the conversations around Mickey's character where they talk about the aliens not wanting to eat him because his meat is crap, because he's made out of the recycled parts of food and you know, whatever they 3D print him out of, the lava at the bottom of the ship. And what I enjoy about that, DoA, is that obviously the implication is that everybody's meat on the ship is crap because they're in a spaceship for 4 years where they're recycling everything. So the immediate implication is they're calling his meat crap, but literally all their meat is crap as well. And so they set up, I think, a really false dichotomy where it pierces the notion that people are better than each other in this kind of closed environment. It's just he's just artificially made, as opposed to consuming all of the slop that they have every day within the mess hall, right? Which looks very unappetizing as part of the food horror. One of the other nice touches of Mickey 17 is that there's the implication that he may have killed his birth mother as Mickey Barnes, his original character, by pushing the red button in the car when he was sitting in the front seat. And at the end of the film, he then uses a red button to detonate the 3D printer, which is also basically his mother, because his mother is now a machine that printed him out, that birthed him. So he kills his real mother with a red button and then kills his robot mother with a red button, which is just funny. It's just funny.
Yeah.
And this is what I like about Bong Joon Ho, is that there is a satirical and a black comedy element that he does really well, and that is good in this film.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, you know, we both said we like the movie, and you know, we do, right? But I feel like for a director that good, you would think that on the storytelling front, you would start to see something a little bit different. I kind of want to, I don't know, he seems to do a lot of screenplay and a lot of writing for the things that he does. I would like to see him direct something that he did not write. I'd be interested in seeing how that, and maybe he has. I'm not, deeply familiar with his entire filmatic catalog, but I want to see something in this modern Bong Joon Ho era, that some film that he didn't write, didn't come up with, but he comes in to direct.
He does frequently have collaborators on his screenplay, or it comes from other material, right? It comes from like this does, like a novel, or both. But yeah, it just feels like this, especially because coming off of a lot of Bong Joon Ho's more recent films, this film, it has the sci-fi claustrophobia of Snowpiercer, and it has the sci-fi class conflict of Snowpiercer, and it has the class conflict of Parasite, and it has the environmentalist messages of Okja, and it just feels overstuffed, is what Mickey 17 feels like. It lacks a lot of direction, and as a result, none of the messages really land. And I think that's what's disappointing about this movie, is that it feels like such a cool concept, and it's visually well executed, and it has very good moments, but it completely fails on making a profound statement. And that's the real issue here, because I think Parasite does make profound statements, and this just doesn't.
For sure. Yeah, and I mean, this is kind of what happens sometimes, where someone wins some Oscars and all that, and it's like, all right, now you can do whatever you want. What do you want to do? And they're like, I'm going to do exactly what I want with this next film. And sometimes that's not always the greatest, right? I mean, sometimes people need sort of those guardrails that they had before to produce something really great. I mean, I think you look at like George Lucas with Star Wars, there were guardrails there. There were other people that were kind of help directing things. I don't mean literally directing things. I'm saying, well, there were other people literally directing things, but I think, there were also like more people that had more of an impact on the story and all that. It seems like the dialogue and everything. And we got a great trilogy, right? And then the prequels are kind of him getting to do literally whatever he wants. And it's still very him in a lot of good ways. But it feels kind of indulgent. It goes a little bit too far into like, this is what I like versus this is what, is maybe going to be the better storytelling, you know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like I wouldn't trust myself to make a bunch of stuff only by myself, because I don't think any one person is that much of a genius that you can just keep making incredible films only on your own. I think you need a good team to produce like the best product. And so when these directors get to sort of like go wild like this, I feel like you see stuff like this happen where it's still good, but it's a little bit too much them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I feel like it makes sense in my mind, at least.
Yeah. And I think it's difficult to discuss Bong Joon Ho's science fiction without also bringing up Paul Verhoeven, because I mean, especially this film is so much of Starship Troopers. It in the bugs versus man, the lack of understanding, the black comedy and satire, but also, I mean, just the master of satirical science fiction, whether it's RoboCop or Total Recall or Starship Troopers itself, is Paul Verhoeven. Yeah. And I think for me, well, Paul Verhoeven might not have the same technical chops that Bong Joon Ho does in terms of like the craftsmanship of shooting a movie. Not saying he's bad, but I think Bong Joon Ho is just very good. I think Paul Verhoeven is much better at elucidating themes and making more profound science fiction movies. And it just, a lot of the second half of this film feels like the worst version of Starship Troopers.
Maybe. I don't know if I fully agree with that. Because I think, I mean, I see the similarities, because stuff like RoboCop, Starship Troopers, there's a lot of like black comedy elements in it too, a lot of like dark comedy. So, I mean, I hadn't thought about it before, but there are a lot of similarities, thematically, tonally between those two. I mean, I just haven't watched the Paul Verhoeven stuff in such a long time. I don't know if I can quite speak to it super accurately, but I feel like the intent is a little bit different, maybe, where Bong Joon Ho feels a bit more, and maybe this is recency bias, but he feels a little bit more earnest in what he's saying, so that it comes off more ham-fistedly.
That's true.
So maybe that's it. Whereas I feel like there was a bit more of a cynicism that came through in stuff again, like RoboCop, Starship Troopers, all that,
Yeah, but it's more
where
poignant.
I feel
also.
like and I feel like there's a note of, despite all the suffering and horror and all that in Bong Joon Ho films, there's kind of a note of optimism and positivity in his science fiction stuff like this, where in Okja, where like things do work out in the end.
Yes.
They don't work out in a way that doesn't involve suffering and loss, but they do work out, right? Whereas a lot of Paul Verhoeven stuff, I don't think things worked out very well for RoboCop. I don't think things worked out very well for the human beings in Starship Troopers, despite despite the fact that they captured the brain bug at the end, So I feel like there's cynicism versus optimism if you look at the two directors. But so I don't know. I think you can make comparisons, but I don't think you can make like as direct a comparison as you're making.
No, I'm just saying these are both directors who deal with satire, who deal with dark comedy in sci-fi, and who often start with, like Total Recall or Starship Troopers, source material that is then adapted. And it starts as a thought experiment, but I just find Paul Verhoeven's sci-fi films to be more profound because they don't derail and try and do a million things at one time. They stay pretty focused on certain themes and I think are more profound in terms of exploring what it means to be human or these existential issues that are brought forward, like in Total Recall, having, memories implanted, and what is the nature of reality and what is the nature of being human or an individual, basically in an environment where that's possible. And I feel like those questions could also be brought up in Mickey 17, and they start to be, and then they just die and get replaced by a bunch of space politics. And like, I'm not super into that.
No, I think you might be right. I wonder if technology has something to do with that too. That back then you just couldn't do as much, and so that limited scope a little bit too. Whereas this, where you can kind of go anywhere, do anything in your movie, that tempts you to be, to go bigger than you need to scope wise, to the extent where it kind of dilutes the story a little bit. I wonder. Either way, I like both directors. I think I honestly would prefer Bong Joon Ho to Paul Verhoeven. Maybe that's sacrilege to say, but I like a little bit more optimism.
It depends.
At the end of the day,
it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about Bong Joon Ho doing more contemporary stuff like Memories of Murder or Parasite, I probably side with Bong Joon Ho. If we're talking about sci-fi, I definitely prefer Verhoeven.
Okay, sure. I think they're both good, but maybe, man, I'd have to think about that more. But just my knee-jerk reaction is that I feel like the science fiction's a bit more creative on the Bong Joon Ho side of things. But
I don't know, Total Recall, man, it's pretty trippy.
Sure, it is. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying there's no creativity. I'm just saying it's the scale that I'm judging.
It is.
Hey, that's
and
just
look,
me.
that is one of the most enjoyable parts of Bong Joon Ho, is that he tackles sci-fi projects that are much too far out there for almost anybody else. And to me, that's one of the reasons why Mickey 17 is actually worth seeing, despite all my criticisms. As we said at the start, it is enjoyable to watch. It does have good moments. It is funny. It is visually very appealing, and it's an interesting concept, and it's a memorable concept. Like, this is a movie that I will remember forever, right? Because the setup is so fascinating, and it just doesn't stick the landing. And that's the issue here. And there's lots of other good performances within this film too. I mean, Toni Collette is great in everything. I mean, I think she was like robbed of a Best Actress, even nomination for Hereditary, which is wild. If you've seen that movie, I think she should have won, but to not even be nominated for that. I think she's one of the best actresses working today. Mark Ruffalo obviously is much more than the Incredible Hulk, and it's nice to see him do some other stuff.
He's super fun in this. He just goes crazy with it. He hams it up, and that's what the character demands. So he's perfect in the way he plays that, I think.
Yeah, you can say, well, are Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette's characters the best characters? No. Not really. They're pretty one-dimensional. But I mean, as far as being character actors and chewing up the scenery, they do a good job. They do what they were required to do for this movie, which is be absurd. They do it well.
Well, at the end of the day, I think we go back to what we talked about with Robert Pattinson, where I think you can apply that to a lot of the actors in this. Is you really watch this, I think, for the acting, because the acting is really great across the board. All the main characters are. I mean,
Steven
really,
Yeun also
really fun, really interesting. Yeah,
Steven Yeun's just very funny as a sleazy.
I wanted to see more of that character. I was kind of sad because I like Steven Yeun in pretty much everything he's been in, and so. I was sad that we didn't get more of that character, but maybe that goes back to kind of doing a little bit too much. Because if he would have been more involved, I think that would have been fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is something that was kind of left behind, was that there wasn't actually a satisfying conclusion to the arc of Mickey and Steven Yeun's character. It just kind of, I really just don't think we needed the plot arc of the loan shark coming back over and over and over again. It feels like when they left Earth, we could have just been done with it, and that would have been fine.
Yeah, for sure. You could have just left it there, or you could have just cut that character entirely and found a different reason for Mickey to leave,
it actually doesn't require two people to take a loan. I'm just going to put that out there.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean,
he could have just taken the loan and fucked off, and that would have been it.
Yeah, I mean, Steven Yeun, another famous Korean actor, and so maybe that's part of why he's in there too, because Bong Joon Ho. But I don't know. And like I said, I really like Steven Yeun. I wish we could have gotten more of that character, but the amount we got kind of made me think the same thing, where it's like, all right, well, did we even need this kind of subplot? Because there's this throwaway scene at the end where he like fights the guy that comes to kill him and then just like wins, and you're like, well, okay, so did he just never need to be worried about this?
Yeah, exactly. It was fake drama.
So,
it was fake drama the whole time, DoA.
Yeah, so who knows, right? Where maybe Steven Yeun was like, hey, I'd really love to be in your next movie, and Bong Joon Ho was like, sure, all right, that sounds good. You're a great actor. I'm a great director. Let's make something. And so then it came around. It's like, great. What character can I be? Is it a main character? Well, kind of. You're in it. It's like, oh, okay, sure. I guess that's cool. And then that's what we ended up with. So I feel like he was a little bit wasted in this movie. Where just cut that character, find a different movie to put him in front and center. But it is what it is.
I do want to have a time for personal anecdotes here, because there's a part of this film that, if you haven't lived in Korea like DoA and I have, that will be very confusing to you, which is why is it a macaron shop that they are trying to start at the beginning of this movie, where the film starts, and the reason why Mickey and Timo have taken the loan from the loan shark was to start a macaron shop that was supposed to be bigger than burgers, which I feel like many people who are not familiar with Korea will not understand this. But why don't you explain it, DoA?
Oh man, I laughed so hard when that happened in the theater, and I was the only one laughing, and I was like, I'm the only person who gets this joke. This is great. So maybe, what was it, back around 2015, 16, around that era, for some reason, especially in the neighborhood that we lived in the Gyeongridan-gil neighborhood in Seoul, there was this weird, I'm going to say, plague of macaron shops that just appeared. It became like, macarons just became like the popular thing to just go and get with your date. And they were everywhere. I know this sounds crazy. I know I sound like I've been like carbon monoxide poisoned or something here when I'm talking like this, but I'm not kidding, where you would see like macaron shops like once every block. They were almost as common as like coffee shops. It was crazy for a while. And then of course the vast majority of them failed, when partially because you can't have that many macaron shops, and also the trend just ended. It was just a fad. So the fact that that Steven Yeun's character talked him into starting a macaron shop and taking a loan from a loan shark to do it is just so funny, if you know kind of the pop culture trends in South Korea over the last 10 years. And again, if this was supposed to be released a few years ago, that would have been a much more relevant joke than it is now. But yeah, that was extremely funny. But for only a few people here and there in the U.S.
Yeah, you just have to know that South Korea is very trend based. So when a trend happens, it is like everywhere suddenly.
Churros, man. churros.
It happened with churros too. Why were there so many churro shops? But the most annoying thing about this was that this was a neighborhood that we had to live in. And for completely arbitrary reasons, this one neighborhood became like the teen and 20s date walk around neighborhood of Seoul for no reason, by the way. So we were living there, and then all of a sudden, more and more couples, like young couples, just started showing up every weekend. And so it transformed the neighborhood, not in good ways, because as DoA stated, now all of a sudden there were macaron shops, but it's not like there wasn't stuff there before. There were restaurants and bars and things that we went to and enjoyed as people who lived in this neighborhood that were replaced by macaron shops, which were useless to us. So it was just annoying. Yeah. It was really annoying.
He's not exaggerating either. Like a lot of really great restaurants and bars were replaced by macaron shops, or like there was a really great like a banh mi place, and that was replaced by macaron. Like, oh my gosh, it was there for a few months and gone. But if I can envision like Monty's personal hell, it's living in a small claustrophobic neighborhood with nothing but young teen couples walking around and enjoying dates.
It's just like and the problem is Noah is that we left Korea, like we moved out of Korea before the downfall happened, but we visited multiple times. But the problem is that this neighborhood still hasn't recovered from the macaron plague, because
the macarondemic.
When there were two things that happened, both obviously, as DoA said, the macaron shops failed because there were too many of them. And, how many macaron shops can one neighborhood support?
How many can a single person eat at once?
Like,
even like 2?
5.
I mean, they're so sweet. I can eat like 2 and I'm done. But
the problem also was that the neighborhood was no longer the place where people would walk around and hold hands. So there was both a non-interest in macarons and a non-interest in going to this neighborhood. So all of these businesses failed. And then what was left? Nothing. Nothing was left. It just empty storefronts.
Some of the best places survived, though.
That's true. The best places did survive, but a lot of the places that were good but not the best, that were the texture of the neighborhood. And it literally took years for this neighborhood to recover and actually have a thriving business scene again. So basically, all of the nice things that people who lived in the neighborhood all the nice places we would go to were gone, and they were replaced by macaron shops, which within a couple of years were replaced by literally nothing. So it was real shit. And
it was, but it made, if we hadn't gone through all that though, this joke wouldn't have landed, which is great. So it was all worth it in the end. It came full circle when I saw the macaron shop. And what was like the slogan on the macaron shop shirts? I was trying to remember. It was really funny too. I should have wrote it down, but that whole thing was just hilarious. That was the instigating thing for all of this, is that they tried to open a macaron shop. Which is again so funny if you lived in Seoul in the mid 2010s, but if you didn't, then you're not going to get this joke at all. But there's a funny joke in there.
It's obviously a commentary on Korean culture, but also the other way it's commentary on Korean culture is like this get rich quick scheme where you take shady money in order to make the hype thing that is like obviously a bad business idea. You see that in Squid Game, right? The desperation for the quick money. That's a feature of I would say contemporary Korean pop culture.
Right. When I lived there, I mean, you still live there, but when I lived there, and to now too, like you heard a lot of young people talk about hell chosun is what they called it, where a lot of young people felt like they just lived in this world where you would go through this horrible, really brutal, tough school system, only to just end up in this sort of like soulless corporate job that you just then work for the rest of your life. Or if you're a woman, there was still a lot of expectation that you would just kind of like, sure, maybe you go to college, but really the plan is get married and just have kids and stay home and take care of them. There was that pressure on them too. So a lot of this stuff that you see coming out of Korea, and this is addressing a lot of like K-dramas too, and stuff is from that kind of pervading cultural thought of like the last 2 generations, that this is kind of the reality of modern South Korea, that we have all this economic boom and this giant wonderful clean city with all this money, but there's still this like big sort of like class warfare and socioeconomic divide that's going on, which is happening in a lot of modern countries around the world, but I think it's
worse in Korea than most other places.
Yeah. At least, if you look at pop culture as any indication, it certainly is that way.
I mean, that's
right?
why Parasite works, right? Is because it's exactly that.
It's very rooted in that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so Bong Joon Ho obviously takes that perspective and then sees it in other places as well and applies it in movies like Mickey 17, where maybe that's not the best place to apply that.
I mean, it's that there's something, like I said earlier, when you talk about science fiction sort of shining a lens on someone's view of their particular society or time, you don't want to make it like too exact. You want to make people sort of like think of it, but not be like, hey, this is just like same character, different skin, if you put it in video game terms, so you want to have it be like at least a different character, right?
Or if you're going to do it, just like really do it and don't just half-ass it,
Sure.
You can take the South Park approach and it can be very funny. But you do have to like fully go for it. And I think the problem here is that any kind of political messaging is mixed because he's like, well, what if it's like Trump, but also a dictator, but also like an evangelical minister? And it just doesn't work super effectively, especially because they don't really explore the church. Like the church is mentioned, but it's not explained or represented. It's like, oh yeah, and the church would say this. You're like, okay, what? Like,
yeah, well, that's kind of the whole like a little bit too on the nose thing where it's like there's that extremist evangelical element in the right, in America politically and all that. So it's like, oh, we got to mention that too, right? Because this is supposed to be, do we use the word allegory? I don't know about this thing, and so we got to include this stuff. But again, it's like a lot of ham-fisted stuff without a lot of
and if you're going to be on the nose, the South Park way of doing things would maybe be to do this, but what South Park would also do is skewer the environmentalists and have like one of the bugs eat them or something, like because they're trying to coddle this species. Like there's ways you can show both sides of issues or like skewer both sides, which is what South Park is very effective at doing, I think. And it just doesn't do that. So it ends up just kind of hitting you over the head, this film.
Yeah. So, again, if you're looking for something profound and like really, really masterfully done, watch Parasite probably.
Memories of Murder.
Sure. I haven't seen that in so long, or really maybe ever. I can't remember. But anyway, if you want to just watch a cool sci-fi film that's funny, I think genuinely funny. I did like genuinely laugh in a couple parts, which it takes a lot for a movie to make me laugh. And this did it. And it wasn't just through obscure Korean cultural memes. It was also just genuinely funny. So yeah, if you want to watch like a genuinely funny, fun science fiction movie, and you don't mind a little bit of gore and suffering and torture, then I think it's a good movie. It's fun. Like I said, 7 out of 10. I would give a little bit higher. Maybe no, I wouldn't. 7 out of 10 is my max. Yep.
I think 6.5. But I maybe don't watch it in the theater, but watching it, when it comes to a streaming service, and this is Warner Brothers, so it'll be HBO Max will be what it's on eventually, most likely.
Yeah, I don't think you get a ton out of seeing this in the theater. Some science fiction films you do because you have these great big landscapes and all that. You want to see the big stuff
like
in the theater.
Dune.
But this one, like Dune. But this one, there's a very claustrophobic feel to the whole movie, so it's fine, I think, on a small screen. I'm sorry, Nicole Kidman.
So yeah, that'll do it for Mickey 17. We're going back to the 1980s fantasy next week with Ator the Flying Eagle.
Yes.
Kind of an infamous B movie. And then we've got a bunch of them after that. So Sorceress, Beastmaster, Conan the Barbarian, Dark Crystal are all of those coming up next, which is fun. But the week after we do Ator will be the end of Severance, because that's the conclusion of season 2. So we've got all that mapped out for you, We've got all mapped out for you guys and us.
We'll fix it in post.
I'm not fixing that. So I'll just sound bad. That's fine. I accept that.
Wow,
so we'll be
so raw.
we'll be back next week with Ator. See you guys then.